Hi everybody. So I wanted to make a short video about how to pick out your fabrics for America Land That I Love. So we're going to do this Kimberbell bench pillow, America Land That I Love. And I just wanted to make a little video about picking out your fabrics. It's going to take us several times to create this. So I thought, well, I could do this in a pre-recorded video so you could be looking at this ahead of time. So we do need quite a few fabrics for this design. Sorry, my camera's a little bit out of focus. There we go. But you don't need very much of anything. So you need about, well, there's about 14 fabrics in here if you include, but you can double up on some of them. So you need a fat quarter of kind of a white, or like a plainer color. This is going to be the center of the pillow. And then you need, this is fabric number 1. And then fabric number 2 is going to be the borders. So I got these little borders cut here. And you need a fat 1/8 of this, I believe. And a fat 1/8, if you don't know, is a half of a fat quarter. So in other words, it's 9 by like 22. So it's like half of a fat quarter. So this is going to be the borders that go on either side of the light colored fabric, and then also the applique for America and one of the stars. And then you need 6 fabrics, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that are red, white, and blue. And these are going to be the squares, the piece squares on the borders out here. Okay. Then what I did is I doubled up and made my flags out of some of those colors, and then I added a lighter one in the middle. So I'll show you that here in a minute, okay? So here are my 6 colors, and you need a fat 1/8 of each one of these. I have 2 reds, so I have my kind of paisley and my stars, and then I have the same colors in blue. So here's paisleys and stars in the blue. And my blues are kind of more navy. And then I needed some whites. So here's my whites that they also had stars on them and some like quilt blocks on them. So these are my whites. So there's a fat 1/8 of each one of these. And you're going to cut these into each of these. You'll need 3 pieces that are 7 by 3 1/4. So I have 3 pieces, little strips here out of those pieces. Okay. So there's those little, I've got those 3 strips. So there's 18 strips. In other words, you've got 6 colors and there's 18 strips. There are 3 1/4 by 7. What I did is I just cut them the whole width of the fabric. So mine are actually 9, but it doesn't matter. And then I doubled up some of these fabrics as my pennants that go across the top. Okay. So there's 6 of these fabrics. So this is 3 through whatever that is, 3 through 8. Okay, so this is fabric number 8, if I can get it to come off. Fabric number 8. Okay. And my little strips are all cut here. So there's 3 strips that are 3 1/4 inches wide mine were 9 inches. I just cut them off the ends, and that's fine. You can do them. I think it's called for a 7 or a 7 1/4, but okay. And then these little borders, I forgot on fabric number 2. These little borders are like 1 1/4 by, I'm sorry, 1.5 inches by 17. These little borders right here that come off of that. So, okay, so there's the 2 little borders. There's 2 pieces of that on fabric number 2. And then 9 and 10 are going to be your pinwheel the little pinwheels that go on. And I actually introduced 2 new pieces of fabric into that. So I have another red and another blue. You can make them any color you want, but I had another red that was kind of cool, and I had another blue Kimberbell fabric. So those are my 9 and 10, so that's my pinwheels. And then 11 through 13 are going to be my appliques for those pennants. And I brought in, 2 of the fabrics that I already put in the squares. And then I had a little bit lighter blue that I stuck in there. So I've got another one in there. And these were very small pieces, like 4 by 8. Looking at my, 4 by 10. And then the pinwheel fabrics were 4 by 8. It says 4 by 7, but they really need to be 4 by 8 because the pinwheel instructions tell you to have a 4-inch square. So make these 4 by 8, 9 and 10. And then 11, 12, and 13 were 4 by 10. So there's one of each one. And you'll get 2 pennants out of each one out of this one, 2 out of each one of these. And then, you'll need a little piece of that darker color. That's the applique. This is going to be the applique for America. And then a little bit for a star. And then there's also a star out of this one. So there was only one pennant, but then there's a star out of this one. Okay. So that's 11, 12, and 13. And then 14 is going to be my backing. So I have yet another fabric for that. Now it does say to get a half a yard for the backing. I prefer that 3-piece back on the quilt or the pillow. So I like to get a yard. So this is a whole yard of fabric. Okay. So we've got our 14 fabrics, including our backing. And then I wanted to go through and just piece this together. I think everybody, the piecing instructions are pretty clear, but I know there's a few of you who have never really pieced, and then you do strip piece those borders. So I don't know, some of you may not know what strip piecing is, so I thought, well, I'll just do a little video and go through the fabrics and then go through the strip piecing and the piecing of the center. We're going to kind of do this differently. The way they have you do it in the instructions is to piece the middle section with the little teeny borders on the sides and then do the embroidery and then finish putting it together and then quilt it. But what we're going to do is we're going to piece the entire top, then we're going to quilt it, and then we're going to embroider it, because I wanted to be able to quilt it in the hoop and not have to quilt it manually. So so we're kind of doing this a little bit backwards. So we're kind of mixing up what we're doing. So the first step is to do the center section. And just by the way, there are 2 sets of instructions for this project. Again, it's America, Land That I Love. It's one of the Kimber Bell bench pillows. It's one of the older ones, and these are all done completely differently than the newer ones are, because they, I think, were originally sewing patterns, so they incorporated the embroidery into them later. So we're going to kind of do these a little differently. All right, so we're going to, there's 2 sets of instructions. If you have, now I'm doing the one that is made for the, I have to find my instructions here. This is the first page. Here we go. This is the one for the 9 by 14 hoop. I'm going to use that one because I don't have to hoop it more than 3 times. Okay, the main body of the pillow. If you only have a 6 by 10, you can still do this. It is done exactly the same way, except you have to hoop it like 6 times. But it's easy to do. They explain it very clearly. And so if you do have a smaller hoop, you can still do this easily in a 6 by 10. Okay, so I'm not going to be doing the 6 by 10 version this time, but if you look at the instructions and follow what I do with the bigger hoop, you'll easily be able to do it. You just have to hoop it more times. It's not hard at all. They have it very clearly written out. So, okay. So we're going to start by piecing the center of the design, or the center of the pillow. It's going to be that big white piece and then the 2 little borders. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to pause the video for just a second while I get all my fabric unpinned here so that I can do that. And then we will do some piecing. Okay, so I'm ready for some piecing. When I piece, I generally like to use the piecing stitch on the machine. You can use a piecing foot, of course. I've always used my J foot with the piecing stitch just because I find it faster and I don't have to change my foot. So the piecing stitch on the machine is going to be on your Q tab. And then on my machine, it's Q02. So most of the bigger machines that have the touch screens, they're going to be Q02. So what it does is it moves the needle over towards the right, so that if I run my fabric right along the edge, the right side edge of my foot, it's 1/4 inch. So I have also changed the length of my stitch down here to 2.5. I make a lot of mistakes. So it's really hard to rip if it's at 2.0 because I have to rip a lot. So I move mine up to 2.5 and leave it there all the time. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and point this over here. Now, the one thing that I have done in advance is I have cut, and it tells you what to do on page 3 of the instructions. Cut the following from fabric 1, which is the main body of the pillow. One that's 17 by 20 and a half. So you're going to cut it down just a little bit from the fat quarter. A fat quarter is usually about 18 by 22. So you are going to cut it down just a little bit, and then it tells you the measurement. So 17 by 20 and a half. And then you need these two little strips of fabric that are 1.5 by 17. And they're just going to run up the sides. So I'm going to turn these right sides together. I'm going to place the strip on the edge. Move my book here. I'm going to run the fabric then right along the edge of my foot, and because I have my needle in the piecing position. And we're going to piece these little borders on. I don't normally pin when I piece. I think I didn't get quite on the edge. There we go. I like to have my pivot feature on, and I'll show you that button here in a second so that you know what it is. We'll have to do a little ironing for these, but I wanted to show you this because I wasn't sure how many of you had like strip piece, so the strip piecing was a little different. And the instructions are a little bit unclear because in fact, I saw somebody was making this on the Kimber Bellows site, and they said that they were having a little trouble with the strip piecing part. Okay, so we're going to go down the side here. And then we're going to do the other side as well. I normally don't tie off. All right, so we're going to turn this around. Make sure I got this right side up. This fabric's really hard to decide if it's right side up or not. this white. Okay, whoops. Got a lot of little strings, don't I? So we'll do this side. Get these lined up. And when I start sewing, I always drop my needle into the edge of the fabric. And if you drop your needle, you're not going to unthread your machine as easily. And you're also not going to get that eating problem down into your zigzag plate. So remember to drop your needle before you start sewing. A lot of people don't do that. And I've noticed that people struggle with the fabric going down into their needle plate. All right, so we're going to get this all lined up. Just a second here. I like to piece. I don't get to piece very often. And this was really fun because this is a real simple piecing project because it's all squares and not a lot of triangles. And, you know, there's no triangles and stuff. So it makes it easier. All right. So again, I just ran my fabric right down along the edge of my foot. What I do, just to make the seam just slightly under 1/4 inch, I like to just tuck the edge under the foot so that I can see the edge of the foot and the edge of the fabric, but it's just under it, so that makes it a nice scant 1/4 inch, and it's quite accurate. All my stuff turns out very, very, very close. Okay, so at this point, I need to press these out before I go any further. So I'm just going to pause the video for a second, and I'm going to go press these. Now, when I press, I like to press these seams towards the darker fabric. So I'm not going to open the seams. I'm just going to press over and leave those seams together like that. But I'm going to press towards the darker fabric, okay? And I'll be right back. Okay, so I pressed my little borders on, and you can see I've got them pressed towards the darker color, and they're nice and flat. And so we're going to set this aside now for a little bit, and then we're going to work on our the outer borders, the squares. So we're going to have to skip in the book then to the next page. So we're not going to do the embroidery yet. We're going to quilt first and then do the embroidery. So we want to put the entire top together first. So we're going to switch over in my 9x14 instructions to page number 8. And so what you need is you need from each one, and we already talked a little bit about this, but you need a piece of fabric from each one of those 6 colors that we chose. So I have to get my fabric. There we go. So we need 3 out of each one, 3 that are 3 1/4 inches wide strips by, I just did the whole 9 inches because these were fat eighths. So it's 9 inches from top to bottom. So I just cut off on the ends the 3 1/2 or 3 1/4, I believe. Yeah, I'm sorry, 3 1/4 by 9. Okay, so there's 3 in this one. There's 3 in each one of these. Okay, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so there's 18 of those little strips now that I'm going to be working with. Okay, so the first thing it tells you to do is that you're going to lay your strips out in kind of a random order. So what I did with mine is I kind of did red, white, blue, and I just kept going all 18, and I just laid them out. So it's going to be hard for me to show you this on the sewing machine. So what I'll probably do is just lay these out over on my table, and then I'll bring over one row at a time so you can see. But I just laid them out. I know I did mine red, white, blue, and I tried to keep the sequence going from this row to the next row to the next row, and then sewed them together that way so that, you know, most of the colors were not right together. So I tried to keep them kind of randomly placed. So it makes it a little bit hard, but that's the trick, is you just need to do 3 rows of 6, okay? And we're going to sew those longer strips together first. And then what we're going to do is something called subdivision. So we're going to subdivide those strip panels into 2 groups that are 3 1/4 inches wide, and then you'll have squares. So it's actually kind of fun to do strip piecing. It really goes fast when you're doing a bunch of squares. And then you can kind of keep them more random. It's a little easier to keep it random this way. So that's why they had to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and lay these out over on my table, and then I'll bring over one row at a time so that you can see me piece these together. Okay, so I've gathered my little stacks of my strips here. So here's my first stack, my second stack, and my third stack, and I put them in the order that I wanted to sew them. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll sew the first one, and then I'll probably just turn the camera off and sew the other 2 so you can see what they all look like at the same time. But I'm just going to sew these along these long edges. So this is the first block that I want. Get the instructions out of the way here. And I'm going to put the second block, you know, right sides together. And we're doing, again, 1/4 inch seam, so I've still got my piecing stitch on. And then we're just going to piece these together. Second here, I'm having trouble with my foot controller today. There we go. So we're going to do our 1/4 inch piecing, and I'm just going to piece all 6 strips together before I go on to the next, or to do the ironing. I'll just do all of them together and then iron all of them at the same time. So we'll do this third strip. So I just kind of, I kind of stayed in a red, white, blue orientation. So you can do them in any order you want. You can have as many of these as you want. Sorry, I'm having trouble reaching my foot controller, so it's having a power surge here. There we go. But just make them pleasing to yourself, you know, and it's really hard to make things look random. So I just kind of went with the red, white, blue theme, and then I just went from there. So I have a few that are together when they are done, but I think it still looked really nice. I really liked these fabrics. So they all went together. There was a bunch of fabrics in this series, and so they all went together. So it was kind of nice because all the backings all looked really nice, even though they weren't in the front, they still looked really good with it, and because everything matched. All right, piece these together, got a couple more to go. This is a very fun project. I had never done a pillow, one of these older pillows, and I've been anxious to try one because I thought it would be neat to do them, you know, by piecing the entire top and then quilting them before we went on. And then I just did the embroidery through the quilted backing, which I just used muslin on the back. But with it being a pillow, it doesn't matter if the quilting shows in the back or not. So it turned out just fine. And I think if you, with this one especially, there's not a lot of embroidery. If you would do this as a wall hanging, I think you could just use a prettier backing and then just quilt through the whole thing and then do the embroidery. I don't think it would be that, you could just use matching thread maybe. There's not a ton of embroidery on this one, and it's mostly decorative stitches. So you could make a wall hanging out of this as well. All right, so here's our last one. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with my other ones, and I'm going to press these. So again, I'm going to press these with the seams. I just picked a direction, and so I'm going to press them with the seams going to the right. I may have to flip some of the seams over when I go to sew the strips together, and I'll explain that in a little bit, so that they nest together. It makes it easier to get a nice crisp seam where the intersections are. But I'm going to sew my 3 6-strip units together like this and then press them. So I'll be back in a little bit once that's all done. Okay, so I have my 3 strip units ready here. I sewed those 18 3 1/4 by, well, mine were 9. It's called for 7 and something. Mine were 9 inches wide. 3 1/4 inch strips, all these together, and I did my 3 different units. Okay, and then I've also ironed them. So here's I ironed them all the same direction. So when I get ready to put these together, I might actually need to flip some of these seams over so that they're going opposite directions so I can nest them. And I'll show you that in a minute when I decide how I'm going to put them together. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and subdivide these into 3 1/4 inch strips. So I'm going to look at my blocks, and I've noticed, then let's try this one first. Let's pull this one over here. Let's do this one. And you want these to be pretty straight. So I'm going to look at like this end over here. I don't know if you can see very well, but this end here is kind of off. So I'm going to check this side and see if it's fairly even. And they should be relatively even. But I think mine are a little off. So how I like to square these up so that I know this is good and square. You can see, I think if I pull this up a little bit, you'll be able to see. You can see over here. Pull the camera this way a little bit. There we go. Over here, things are a little, so how I do this, how I square these up is I use my seams to help me be very straight with my squares. So I'm going to put this line right here right on one of my seams, and I can see that my block is a little off square. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim this down here first. And square this up just a little bit. It wasn't very off, but just a little bit. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I need 2 strips that are 3 1/4 inches wide from each one of these strip units. So I'm going to go to my 3 1/4 on my ruler. I've got it marked. This is 3 1/4 right here. Okay. And then I'm going to trim. I'm going to trim across this direction. So then we look like we have 3 1/4 inch squares. Need a new blade on my rotary cutter, so it's a little bit, there we go. Okay, so then there's a strip unit that has 3 1/2 inch squares in it, or 3 1/4, excuse me, inch squares in it. So we're going to do a second one of those. So I'm going to go back up to my 3 1/4 line on my ruler. We just need 2 from each one of these. Okay. So I've got a little piece that's left here. I'll just set this aside because I might need it for something. And then, so there's my strip units then from the first one. So now let's do the second one here. Let's see. I noticed that I'm a little off on this one too. So this one's a little more off. Let's turn it this way. It might be easier. Notice this one was a little off, so I'm going to try to get this squared up also. I used the seam line to help me get it square down there, and you can see this one's pretty off. So trying to get this all nice and straight here. But you want to do that before you start trimming, otherwise your squares won't be straight. There we go, that looks better. It's a little hard with the camera here to do the trimming, so I'm hoping that you can see me okay. Make sure these are good and straight. Try that one more time just to make sure it looks good and straight. Looks good and straight, I think. Yep. All right, so we're going to go to 3 1/4. So you have to do a little squaring usually. Sometimes, you don't get your ends lined up just perfectly, and the other end, the opposite end often ends up being slightly off too. So that's why I'm starting on the one that was the closest. All right, so we're going to do 3 1/4 inches, and we're going to do these strip sets. So here's the first one. I'm going to kind of keep these in order so I know how I want to make my sides then. So we'll put these together. Here's the second one. Okay. And I'm kind of off kilter, so let's see if I can straighten this out. There we go. Looks better. And we'll get these trimmed to 3 1/4. Okay, so this is my little extra piece. I'll put this aside. All right, so here's the 2 strip sets from that one. And then let's do the third one. This is the third one. Let's see if these are even. These look a little more even than the other ones did. But the seams can help you even it out. This one's pretty good actually. So this one I think will be okay. So I'm going to do my 3 1/4 inches. So these blocks are going to end up being 2 3/4 inches square when they're sewn together. Okay, so there's the first strip set, and these are 3 1/4. I think I got, oops, I like to trim a corner off. I'm not very good with the rotary cutter. I've always had trouble with the rotary cutter, so don't mind me if they look slightly off here. So all right, we'll get our 3 1/4 here. So I got to move this over a little bit. So my ruler will lay flat. Okay. There's my 3 1/4. And then we're going to trim this strip set. And then we're all done with the trimming. All right. So we got the trimming done. So now what I'm going to do, and we'll be doing some ironing here. Let me clean up my table here just a little bit. We're going to do a little bit of ironing. But what I'm going to do is I am going to place these in an order so that I like them. And I think what I'm just going to do is I'm going to try to do them in the order that I just cut them. So I'm going to have these 2 together like this. And I think that should look good. And then here's the first strip set. So we'll do this one. And then this one. Like this. So I think that'll be good. And they look fairly random. I tried to make it random without try to make it look random. And none of the squares are like right next to each other. So that's good. So that's why I kind of kept them in this order. And then what I want to do is I want to look to see if my seams, since I pressed my seams all going the same way, it might be easier to nest them if the seams in the center one could be pressed the opposite direction. So like right now, the white is at the top, and right now they're all going down. So I'm going to actually take this over to my ironing board now, and I'm going to flip these seams pointing up on just this one row, since I now know how I want to sew this together, to make my seams be opposite. So I'm just going to finger press them. Here I'm just flipping that seam upward towards the white top, and then I'm going to iron this nicely with my iron, and then it'll be so much easier to nest the seams. So I'll show you the nesting of the seams over at the sewing machine once we get this part done, and then we will make our ends and apply the ends to the center portion. So see how I did this? I just finger pressed these upward here, okay, and then I'm going to press those down. I'm going to do that to both of the center sections because it's the one with the white here, so that way I know that my seams are going opposite directions. So I'm going to turn the camera off for just a minute while I press these, and then I'm going to move back over to the sewing machine so we can sew these together. Okay, so now we're back over at the sewing machine, and I am make sure I didn't hit the wrong button. I think we're good. We're back over at the sewing machine, and so I have my strip sets here. And what I was doing with the ironing was, I'll show you when I go to pin this. So we're going to sew these 3 strip sets together now, but we want those squares to line up beautifully. So what I did with the second strip set is, see, I moved the seams so they're pointing up, and then the other ones are pointing down. So now I can nest these together where those seams are, and it just falls right into a little crevice. And what I do when I go to do these is I like to pin on both sides of the seam allowance so that nothing scoots on me. So we're going to do each one of these, and that each of the little seams should just fall right into place. You can kind of feel it with your fingers. It just falls right into the 2 seams, just what they call nest together, and you can just feel them go right in there. Get it in there, and I'm going to pin all 3 of these, or all 6 of these, so that they're together. And then we're going to stitch these together. And then that will be our ends of our pillow top. But I had another little, when I was thinking about this, how I did this before, I did this, earlier this weekend and made the whole pillow. And I had to remember how I did the ends, because I did kind of a little thing at the end so that it made it look different. So hopefully I remember to do that this time. Okay, so we got our little pieces together. I've got them all pinned, okay? And then we're going to stitch with, I'm still on my piecing stitch, my Q02, and I'm going to piece my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Whoops, must have hit the cut button by accident. I'm going to drop my needle, and I'm going to show you something quickly on the screen. I have my pivot. We were talking about the pivot earlier. I have my pivot feature on, which means that when I let up on the gas, like if I let up off the foot controller, then it will stop the machine and it'll lower the needle and raise the foot. And then when I step down again, it will drop everything and go. So I like that feature when I'm piecing, because then I don't have to touch a lot of buttons. So it's this little foot button with the little needle in it. So that is on a lot of the machines. So go ahead and use that, because it's very, very handy. All right, so we're going to get down here to the, oops, I think I unthreaded my needle though. Let's try that again, shall we? It's only on live camera that you have to watch me thread my needle 10 times. Okay, so let's try it again. Remember, we drop the needle at right into the fabric, and then we go. All right, now, I am going to go over these pins slowly, because I don't like to take them out. If I take them out, then certainly my little joints will move. Every single time I take them out, they move. So I've always just left them in. That's why I use these teeny tiny little thin pins, so I don't have to take them out. And yes, every now and then you'll still hit one, but if they're not, these are so soft that they just don't damage your machine. So just don't drive over them 100 miles an hour. Just be careful. So there's the end of that seam. So I'll take all of these out and then we'll do the last one. So you can see one whole unit done, and then I'll pause the camera and do the second unit. You don't need to watch me do that. The other thing that I will do then at the end of sewing these together is I'm going to press my seams open, of course. So let's do the second side. So this was the center one, and then this is going to be the last one. So we're going to do the same thing. Since these seams were pressed upward, these are still pressed downward, then these little seam allowances are going to nest nicely. Because when I did these originally, I wasn't sure how I was going to do them, and it was just easier to flip the seams over after I decided where they were going to go. So that way we don't have to open them up. You can open your seams up, but I always have more trouble getting my seams to line up that way. They line up so much better this way if you can nest them. Okay, so I'm just pushing those little corners together, and you can feel it underneath your fingers that they slide in. You can just feel them slide right in together. And I'm going to I put a pin on both sides of the seam allowance so that it won't move for me. So you can just feel it in there. So you can kind of feel it flatten out as soon as it hits into the little groove. And this one, get this one all in there. Okay. And then we're going to stitch this one with our 1/4 inch seam as well. And then, like I said, these little squares are actually going to end up finished like 2 3/4 then, because we took 2 1/4 inch seams out of that 3 1/4. So, all right, so I'm going to start on the edge. I'm going to drop my needle before I start, and you can see the pivots working. And again, don't go over those pins very fast. It's okay that you drive over them slowly. I would not recommend doing this with big, heavy pins. So these little magic pins are so small and soft. They work real well. And they're called Patchwork Pins. I have them up on the website, and I love them. I do throw a lot of them away because I bend them because they're so soft, but I just buy a lot of pins. All right, we're just about there. Get this one all lined up down here. All right. And right off the end. Now I'm not back stitching, I'm just going off the end. That's fine. Okay. And take these out. And then I'm going to take this over to the iron, and I'm going to press my seams. It doesn't matter which way they go this time. I think I just press them to the right. It doesn't matter which side because there's no other piecing, but you can see how the seams all lined up nicely because of the nesting that we did. And I think that looks really good. So I'm going to do the other side, and I'm going to press these, and then I will show you. Then the last step would be assembling them to the rest of the top. Okay, so I've finished my pressing, and I've got my seams pressed to, I did these to the right, but it doesn't really matter which way these goes. You just want them to be pressed nice and flat. And then I have gone ahead and laid I wanted my sides to be in a certain way, so I had this red block. Remember how I did like red, white, blue, and so on, and then white, blue, red, white, blue, and so on. So I had this one in the top left-hand corner, so I wanted my left-hand panel to be the way I had it originally laid out. So I have this one with the red square in the corner, and I pinned it on to the center panel. So let me pull this back just a little bit. So here's the center panel where that little edging was on the edge, and I've got it pinned on the way I had it oriented over there on the table. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch this on to the left. This is the left-hand side, and I've got it already pinned. Again, I'm using my 1/4 inch seam, using my Q02 piecing stitch. Don't go over the pins too fast. Okay, make sure I get it all. And if you were careful with your piecing, everything should match up nicely for the size. And looks like it turned out pretty well. Oops, second here, I got to move that pin out a little bit. All right, and go off the ends. And I normally don't backstitch even on the ends of these because they're going to be sewn into the seams, so I don't usually do that. Okay, so then I'm going to unpin this. And this was my little trick because I didn't want my two ends to look exactly the same. So what I did, so this is the one, the left end. Let me move my pins out of the way here. Pull this back a little bit. I didn't want my two ends to look exactly the same. So this is the way I had, you know, with my left one in red in the corner up here. So what I'm going to do on the other side is I'm going to take that same side. So here's that red block, and I'm just going to end for end it and go like this and make this one like the opposite. I just kind of mirrored it so that they weren't exactly the same on both sides. But it would made it look a little bit more random, so I just end for ended it on this side. So we're going to go ahead and pin this one on. Hopefully I did okay on this side too. Having a little trouble getting my ends to match up here. I like to put a pin like where the seam is so that I can make sure that that seam that I've ironed down kind of stays flat. So I like to put a pin in there just to hold everything down. And oops, let's turn the camera down so you can see a pin in here, sorry. And get this side done. All right, so then we're going to sew this side on. So this is a very easy piecing design, but it is nice to have, I wasn't sure if everybody had ever strip pieced before. I know there's a few of you that don't really quilt, and I'm not really a quilter either. I've just learned as I've gone along, but I wasn't sure that the strip piecing instructions were just a little bit vague, so I wanted to make sure you understood what this little square strip piecing business was. So here we go. We're going to get this side on. And again, like I said, I just kind of end for ended this one. So instead of the red being in the top left, it's in the bottom right corner. And I thought it made the squares look a little more random, and they weren't exactly the same on both sides. All right, so we're getting this side done. Just a second here. Got to get my ends to line up. Okay. And there is that side. Now the one thing I did do with these when I went to do the pressing, let's get these unpinned so I can show you. I'm going to take these over then and I'll press them and I'll bring it back over. I wanted to press my seams in towards this darker strip. So I did on this one then I ironed the seams inward towards the darker strip so that both of the seam allowances were on that narrow strip. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do that, and I will be right back to show you what the finished top looks like. Okay, so here's my completed top. I have both sides on. I have my seams pressed towards the little blue borders here on the side, and they are in opposite corners. So I kind of end for ended those sides so that they're not exactly the same and they look real random that way. Now this is going to be done. So the way I decided to do this class is to do this little video, and then this is going to be ready now to be sandwiched, to be quilted. So what we're going to do is we are going to start the live classes with the quilting, and we'll talk about a few of these things before, but I thought I would just review quickly before I ended the video about the piecing at the top. I'll just briefly go through the fabrics again so that everybody understands the fabrics. So the number one fabric is this white background fabric. You need a fat quarter of that. And then most of the other fabrics you need like a what they call a fat eighth, which is like a half of a fat quarter, or a half of a quarter of a yard, in other words. So it's a half of a fat quarter. So you need number two, the fabric number two, that was that little borders, those little borders on the sides, and also the applique for America and one of the stars, and that was a fat eighth. and then you needed a fat eighth of 6 different fabrics that are 2 red, 2 blue, and 2 white. Okay, and there was a fat eighth of those, and those were those strip sets that we just sewed together for the ends. Okay, and then there's enough of that fabric then, of that fat eighth, to then cut if you want, and that's what I did, is I cut fabrics 11, 12 are going to be some of my pennants, and those are up out of that grouping of fabric, and then I added a lighter one to go with it, so my 13. So here's my little pieces I got ready for my pennants that we're going to do with the embroidery. And then fabrics 9 and 10 were small strip pieces that these are going to be for the little pinwheels that are on the front of the pillow. And I did a blue, and I actually introduced another red into it. And then my last fabric is my backing fabric, and I'm going to do a 3-piece back. So I'm going to show you the pillow here at the end, and I'm going to do a 3-piece back. So you need a yard of fabric. In the instructions it says a half a yard, but you do need a yard to do the 3-piece back. It's so much easier to get the pillow in and out of that 3-piece back. Otherwise it's so hard because all of the pillow has to go into this really long case, and it's so much easier with openings on both ends. So we're going to do the 3-piece back, which requires 1 yard of fabric. Okay, so then what we'll do in the live videos, we're going to start with the sandwiching of this top with batting, and I'm just going to use muslin on the back, so you'll need some muslin to use for the backing. And then, because I'm not going to make a wall hanging. Now, if you want to make a wall hanging, you could still do that. And you could put a prettier fabric on the back. Remember that we are going to then be embroidering through the back. So what I would probably tell you to do is when you choose your threads, you can actually put matching thread in the bobbin then for your embroidery. I'm just going to make a pillow, so I just used bobbin thread in the bobbin, and then I'm going to use just some muslin on the back, okay, with my batting. I like to use Hobbs 80-20 batting, and that's what I have. A lightweight cotton batting or a cotton blend would be good for this project for the batting. Okay, so here's our fabric, and then I'll talk briefly about the threads. So the threads that I chose, what I did is I just kind of matched my fabric. So I have a red, I have a blue, and my blues are all kind of a navy blue. So I had a red and a blue, and then I wanted to match that lighter blue, so I have 2 blues in here. So this one kind of matched my lighter blue, and then I also brought a little silver metallic into mine. So I just used 4 colors. I usually just kind of match my fabrics is how I do decide on my colors. Okay, so I have 4 colors of thread. We will need, I don't think we need any thread in the bobbin. Oh, we will need some thread in the bobbin when we go to do our pinwheels. So I use the red for that. So we'll talk about that when we get ready to do our pinwheels at the last class. So this will be a pre-recorded video that I'm going to put up on the group about a week or 2 ahead of the class starting. And when we start the live classes, it'll actually be, this top will be finished, so you can watch this video to do your top. And then we will sandwich it and do the quilting first. Because normally what they have you do at this point is they have you do the embroidery on just the center section and then do the ends. But I wanted the whole thing quilted before I started embroidering on it. So I'm kind of doing this in a little different order, and I wanted you to have a video that you could just look at get your top ready, and then we can start we'll do the quilting. In the first live video will be quilting, the second live video will be the embroidery, and then the third live video will be the pinwheels and the assembly of the pillow. So let me get the pillow here so you can see it. Got it all done. So I'm going to pull the camera back so you can see, hopefully. It's hard when it's so big. But here's the pillow with here's the little pinwheels, and you can see it's all quilted. And the ends, and you can see where where I've got the red square on this end, and then the red squares on this side down here. So I did that, And then here's my backing on this one. The backing was different. I have different fabric for the other one. So this one had little stars on it, and then I've got the plaid for the other one. And it's got a 3-piece back. So there's a piece here and a piece here, and then these overlap in the center. It's just so much easier to get it in. Okay. So I think we're done, and hopefully everybody can get their tops assembled before the first live class. And if you have any questions, you can always personal message me through Facebook or send me an email or call me at the store. And hopefully this helps everybody. It was fun to do. This was a very fun project, and it was a simple, easy piecing project, but I wanted to be able to show you how to actually make the whole top. And that way we didn't have to take the time to make the whole top in the class, in the live classes. So everybody have a good day, and I hope, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you. Bye-bye.